They laughed when they handed me the box. 3 pairs of cheap socks, still with the discount tag hanging off the side. "Happy Father's Day," they said, their voices dripping with sarcasm, as if my worth could be measured in cotton and elastic. I looked at those socks, and I didn't just see a gift. I saw every sacrifice I had ever made for them, turned into a joke. They thought I was weak, that I was old, that I was nothing more than a man taking up space in a house they already dreamed of calling their own. But what they didn't know was that I had my own gift waiting for them. They gave me socks. I gave them an eviction notice. My name is Richard. I'm 70 years old, and this is the story of how my children forgot what respect means, and how I reminded them in a way they will never forget. Before I begin, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. The socks had barely been tucked into my drawer when I started noticing the cracks widen. At dinner one evening, my eldest leaned back in his chair, arms folded, and said with a smirk, "When this house is ours, we're knocking down that wall and opening up the kitchen." His siblings laughed, clinking their glasses together like they'd already won some prize. I sat there quietly, chewing my food, pretending I hadn't heard, but the words lodged themselves inside me like splinters. Another time, my daughter brushed past me in the hallway as I was tightening a loose light fixture. "Dad, you're too old to be climbing ladders," she said, rolling her eyes. "You'll break your neck one day, and then what? We'll have to deal with the mess." She didn't say it with concern, she said it with annoyance, as if my presence in my own house was a burden waiting to spill over into her life. The smallest comments began to stack up. One son grumbled about how I cooked old people food, anoches. Her complained that the living room felt outdated and joked that it would be the first thing to change once the house papers are in our hands. They laughed, thinking it was all harmless fun, but each remark carried the weight of a truth they didn't even bother to hide anymore. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that maybe they were just careless with their words. I even laughed weakly a few times to make it seem like I was in on the joke. But deep down, I knew better. Their tone was sharper now, colder, as if I were already fading from the picture. They looked at me not as the man who built these walls, but as an old obstacle standing between them and their inheritance. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, listening to the crickets in the garden. The house stood behind me, solid and quiet, the same house I had poured my blood and sweat into. But for the first time in decades, I felt like a stranger in my own home. They weren't waiting for me to share it with them. They were waiting for me to vanish. It was late on a Wednesday evening when the truth finally bared its teeth. I had gone to bed early, or at least that's what my children thought. The house was dim and quiet, but from downstairs I heard the low hum of voices. My children gathered in the living room. Curious, I slipped from bed and crept to the hallway landing, careful with each step. Their words floated up the staircase, clear as day. "Dad's not going to last much longer in this place," my eldest said. His voice carried a certainty that made my stomach twist. "He can't keep up with the bills, the maintenance. It's just a matter of time before it's ours." My daughter laughed lightly. "Honestly, why wait? He should already be in a nursing home. Then we'd have the house free and clear. Imagine what we could do with it. Tear down the old porch, modernize the kitchen, maybe even add a pool." Another chimed in. "We could sell it and split the money. Do you know what property in this neighborhood is worth right now? Dad's sitting on a gold mine, and he doesn't even realize it." Their laughter followed, sharp and hollow, echoing off the walls I had built with my own hands. I clutched the banister, my knuckles white, as their words settled into me like ice. They weren't talking about me like I was their father. They were talking about me like I was already gone, a body waiting to be cleared away so they could cash in. In that moment, I felt Margaret's absence more than ever. I pictured her in her favorite armchair by the window, sipping tea and humming along to the radio. She had loved this house, every brick, every flower she planted in the garden. I could almost hear her voice whispering, "Richard, don't let them forget what this home means. Don't let them take it from you." I backed away quietly, my chest heavy, my mind racing. I wanted to storm down the stairs and confront them right there, to shout and remind. Them whose name was on the deed. But something inside me stopped. Anger would only feed their cruelty. No, this betrayal needed something stronger than shouting. It needed a lesson they could never laugh off. That night, as I lay back in bed, their voices still ringing in my ears, I knew things would never be the same. They hadn't just disrespected me, they had declared me disposable, and that was something I could never forgive. Sleep would not come that night. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling as their words replayed in my head over and over again. He should already be in a nursing home. It's just a matter of time before it's ours. We could sell it and split the money. Every sentence was another knife, twisted deeper, and the silence of the house made their betrayal echo even louder. I turned to the nightstand and picked up the photograph of Margaret. She was smiling in it, holding our youngest on her lap, sunlight streaming through the old kitchen window behind her. I held that frame tight in my hands and whispered, "Did we raise them wrong, Margaret? Did I give them too much? Did I forget to teach them the one lesson that matters most, respect?" Memories flooded in, uninvited but unstoppable. Nights when I stayed up past midnight, working double shifts just to pay for tuition. Times I skipped meals so the kids could eat better. The family vacations I canceled because bills came first. Every sacrifice, every compromise, every drop of sweat I had poured into this family, and now I was nothing more than an obstacle in their eyes. The guilt gnawed at me. Maybe I had done this to myself. Maybe every time I bailed them out, every time I said yes instead of no, I was teaching them that their father was a safety net to be used and forgotten. I thought love meant giving, but maybe I had confused love with servitude. Around 3 a.m, I rose from bed and walked through the house. The floor creaked beneath my feet, the same wood I had laid down with my own hands decades ago. I ran my fingers along the walls, the banister, the door frames marked with pencil lines showing how tall the kids had grown each year. Every inch of this place carried the weight of my life's work, and yet, to them, it was nothing more than a payday waiting to happen. I sank into Margaret's old chair by the window, staring into the dark garden outside. The air smelled faintly of her lavender plants, long since overgrown but still clinging on. In that stillness, I felt something change inside me. The guilt began to harden into resolve. If they truly saw me as disposable, then I would show them that I wasn't just some old man waiting to fade away. I was still the builder of this house, the keeper of its keys, and the man who would decide its future. As dawn broke, I made myself a cup of strong coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the deed folded neatly in its envelope. My children thought they were planning my end, but they were about to learn that I was planning their lesson. The morning after that sleepless night, I ironed a slate Chalice Ian shirt, tucked the deed into a worn leather folder, and drove to the office of the only man I trusted with matters this serious, my lawyer, Thomas Thompson. He had handled my affairs since Margaret passed, guiding me through wills, insurance, and the paperwork no grieving man wants to face. If anyone could help me now, it was him. His office smelled faintly of old books and coffee, the shelves lined with binders neatly labeled in gold lettering. Thomas looked up from his desk when I entered, his gray eyebrows lifting with recognition. "Richard," he said warmly, shaking my hand. "It's been a while. What brings you in?" I sat across from him, placing the folder on his desk. "It's my children, Thomas," I said quietly. "They've forgotten what respect means. They talk about this house as if it's already theirs. They've called me a burden, said I should be in a nursing home. Last week they laughed while planning what they'd do with the property after I'm gone. I can't live with that anymore." Thomas's expression darkened as he opened the folder and scanned the deed. "You've always been generous with them. Too generous, if you ask me. But Richard, this house, this is yours. No one can take it from you unless you let them." I nodded slowly. "That's why I'm here. I want to remind them that nothing in this world is free. I want eviction papers drawn up. If they can't respect me as their father, then maybe they'll respect the law." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "You realize, once we do this, things may never be the same between you and your children. It will be ugly. They'll fight. They'll call you heartless." "I've already heard worse," I replied, my voice steady. "They told me I was worth nothing. If I don't stand up now, I'll be proving them right." Thomas studied me for a moment before nodding. "Very well. We'll draft the eviction notice today. By law, they'll have 30 days to leave. If they resist, we'll go to court. But understand, this will be a battle." I signed the initial paperwork, my hand firm, the pen scratching across the page louder than I expected. It wasn't just a signature, it was a line drawn in the sand. When I left his office, the folder felt heavier than when I arrived. But this time, it wasn't the weight of despair. It was the weight of justice beginning to take shape. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of peace. The lesson had begun. After meeting with Thomas, I came home carrying more than just papers. I carried a quiet fire inside me. But if there was one thing I knew after raising children, it was this. Sometimes silence is more powerful than shouting. So I said nothing. I kept my routine exactly the same, masking the storm I was preparing to unleash. I made breakfast as usual, pouring coffee and frying eggs while they shuffled into the kitchen half awake. They barely muttered thanks, already scrolling on their phones and bickering over trivial things. I sat at the table, sipping my coffee, nodding at their chatter, as if my mind wasn't 1,000 miles away. In reality, I was already picturing the moment their laughter would turn to, oh, disbelief. At night, when they thought I was asleep, I quietly packed away valuables, old photographs, Margaret's jewelry, documents that mattered. I placed them in a locked chest and slid it into the back of my closet. I even made copies of everything, bank statements, the deed, the eviction papers, because I knew what desperation could make people do. I wasn't going to let my preparation be undone by their carelessness or rage. During the day, I busied myself with repairs I had neglected. I tightened hinges, replaced light bulbs, and oiled the squeaky gate. To them, it must have looked like an old man trying to keep busy, but to me, it was reclaiming the house. With every nail hammered and screw turned, I reminded myself, this was mine, not theirs. They still carried on with their arrogance. One evening I overheard my daughter on the phone, laughing as she described the kitchen renovations she wanted once Dad finally moves out. Another bragged to a friend about the neighborhood market value, saying, "We'll be set once the house is in our hands." I said nothing. My silence was my shield, my calm, the sharpest blade. Inside, the anger no longer burned wild. It had cooled, hardened into something stronger. Resolve. I wasn't rushing to punish them. I was waiting for the right moment to teach them, a lesson only life and law could deliver. Every night before bed, I opened the drawer where the notices rested, neatly stacked and ready. I would run my fingers over the edges of the paper, reminding myself that this wasn't just a plan, it was a promise. They thought they had time. They thought they had power. But soon they would discover just how wrong they were. The morning I chose to deliver the papers was calm, almost ordinary. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen curtains, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. I set the table deliberately, placing cups in front of each chair and setting the eviction notices neatly in the center, folded so that only their names showed. My hands didn't shake. For the first time in months, I felt steady, like a man finally standing on his own ground. When they filed into the kitchen, yawning and scrolling on their phones, I greeted them as usual. "Morning," I said, pouring coffee into their cups. They sat down, oblivious, bickering lightly over whose turn it was to do the dishes. I let them chatter for a moment, then slid the papers across the table. "What's this?" my eldest asked, picking up the top sheet. "Read it," I said quietly, sipping from my mug. The room grew still as their eyes scanned the words. First came confusion, then disbelief. My daughter let out a laugh, sharp and nervous. "Eviction notice? Dad, what is this supposed to be? Some kind of joke?" I leaned forward, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "It's no joke. You have 30 days to move out. This house is mine, not yours. You've forgotten what it means to respect the man who gave you everything, and now you'll learn what it means when respect is gone." My eldest slammed the paper down. "You can't be serious. We're your children. This is our home, too." I shook my head. "You are my children, yes, but this is not your home. It's a privilege I allowed you to enjoy, and you repaid me with insults, mockery, and greed. On Father's Day you gave me socks, as if I were a beggar, and then you laughed about what you would do with my house once I was gone. You forgot that I am still here, still alive, and still the man whose name is on the deed." Their faces flushed with anger. My daughter leaned forward, voice sharp. "You'd throw us out? Your own family?" I set my mug down gently. "Family is built on love and respect. You chose greed and entitlement. That was your choice. This," I tapped the notice, "is mine." The silence that followed was heavy, like a storm pressing against the walls. For once, they had no quick jokes, no clever comebacks. Just the stark truth staring back at them from a sheet of paper they never thought they'd see. The shock didn't last long. Almost as soon as the silence fell, their defenses began to rise. My eldest forced a laugh, tossing the notice back on the table. "Come on, Dad. You don't mean this. You're just angry about the Father's Day thing. We were joking. Don't take it so seriously." My daughter leaned in, her voice suddenly sweet, dripping with the kind of charm she used to get her way as a child. "Dad, you know we love you. We were just teasing. You've always been too sensitive. Let's forget about these papers, okay?" She pushed the notice back toward me as though I'd slide it into a drawer and never speak of it again. But I didn't move. "This isn't about socks," I said calmly. "This is about years of disrespect, about you treating me like a placeholder, waiting for me to disappear so you could take what isn't yours yet. I heard you in the living room that night. You weren't joking. You were planning." The color drained from her face, and for a moment the mask slipped. Then came the next tactic, anger wrapped in guilt. "So what? You're going to make us homeless? Your own blood? What will people think of you, Dad? An old man throwing his children out on the street? Is that how you want to be remembered?" I felt the sting of her words, but I didn't let it show. "If people ask, I'll tell them the truth, that my children chose greed over gratitude, and left me no choice but to protect my home." They shifted in their seats, whispering to one another. Then my youngest tried the practical approach. "All right, fine. What if we pay rent? Real rent, every month. We'll sign something if that's what you want. You can't just throw us out. We can fix this." I shook my head slowly. "Rent is money. Respect is priceless. You can't buy back what you threw away." Their voices grew louder, desperate, layered with excuses, promises, and empty bargains. But I sat there, calm, unmoved, letting their words wash over me like waves against a rock. For the first time in years, I wasn't bending. When they finally ran out of things to say, I stood, gathering the notices from the table and placing them neatly back into the folder. "You have 30 days, I said. Use them with Eli." The look on their faces told me they finally understood. This time, I wasn't bluffing. The days that followed were tense and bitter. My children walked around the house like strangers, slamming doors, muttering under their breath, and refusing to look me in the eye. Their anger simmered, but beneath it I saw fear that I was serious. And I was. 2 weeks into the 30-day notice, I found a letter slipped under my bedroom door. It was from a lawyer. Their lawyer. They were challenging the eviction, claiming the house was family property, and that I was acting under emotional distress. I almost laughed. Family property? Emotional distress? The house was in my name, bought and built long before they were even born. Still, they wanted a fight, and I was ready to give them one. When the court date arrived, I walked into the courthouse with my lawyer, Thomas, by my side. My children sat on the other side of the aisle with their attorney, Amanda, who looked young enough to be their classmate. Their faces were full of forced confidence, but I could see the cracks, dark circles under their eyes, the weight of knowing their scheme was about to collapse. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, called us to order. "We are here to determine the validity of the eviction filed by Mr. Richard Miller against his adult children." Her voice echoed through the chamber, and suddenly every whisper in the room died. Their lawyer spoke first, painting me as a cruel old man driven by bitterness. She spoke of family bonds, of history within the walls, of children who had grown up in that house and now faced being thrown onto the street. Her words were smooth, but hollow. There was no proof, no contracts, no legal claim, just sentiment and pity. Then it was Thomas's turn. He rose calmly, sliding the deed onto the judge's bench with practiced precision. "Your Honor, this is the original and current deed to the property. It is solely in Mr. Miller's name. There is no lease, no agreement, no shared ownership. His children have been living there at his good will, not by right. He has followed the law by providing proper notice. The eviction is valid." He then presented bank records, receipts, and photographs of repairs I had done myself, proving not only ownership, but responsibility. "Your Honor," Thomas said firmly, "this is not about family sentiment. This is about property rights, and those rights belong entirely to my client." The judge studied the documents, flipping through the pages with care. Then she looked at my children. "Do you have evidence to prove otherwise?" They squirmed in their seats, avoiding her gaze. Their lawyer stammered, trying to stretch emotion into evidence, but it collapsed under the weight of the truth. Finally, the judge set the papers down and spoke clearly. "The court finds in favor of the petitioner. The eviction is lawful and will proceed. The children have until the original deadline to vacate. Should they fail, the sheriff will enforce the order." Her gavel came down with a sharp crack, and the sound rang in my chest like a drumbeat of justice. I glanced at my children, their faces pale, their arrogance stripped away. For once, they had nothing to say. The deadline came faster than they expected. For weeks they had stomped around the house in denial, clinging to the hope that I would back down, that the court ruling had been some kind of bluff. But the law doesn't bluff, and neither did I. On the morning the sheriff was scheduled to arrive, the house was chaos. Boxes half-packed littered the living room. Clothes were thrown into garbage bags. Arguments erupted between them about who was taking what, about who had wasted time instead of preparing. Their pride had kept them from facing reality until the last possible moment, and now reality was at the door. When the knock came, it was steady, not angry. The sheriff stood tall, clipboard in hand, 2 deputies behind him. His voice was calm, professional. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. We're here to enforce the court order." He tipped his hat politely to me before stepping inside. My children rushed forward, voices rising, faces red. They begged, pleaded, shouted, anything to delay the inevitable. "You can't just throw us out," one cried. "We're family," another shouted. But the sheriff didn't flinch. He held up the papers signed by the judge. "This is the law. You've had your 30 days. Now it's time to comply." I stood by the kitchen counter, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, silent. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was clarity. This wasn't about winning. This was about teaching them the one lesson they had refused to learn. The deputies moved efficiently, supervising as my children carried out boxes and bags. Every slam of the front door, every bitter glance, every tear was a reminder that consequences had finally caught up to them. They weren't victims. They were tenants who had mistaken generosity for weakness. At one point, my daughter dropped a box and turned to me, her face streaked with tears. "Is this what you wanted, Dad? To see us suffer?" Her voice cracked with anger and pain. I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. What I wanted was respect. What I needed was peace. You gave me neither. This is the result of your choices, not mine. By midday, the last of their belongings was gone. The sheriff approached me, nodded, and handed me a slip confirming the enforcement. "House is clear, Mr. Miller. You're back in control." When the door closed behind them, the house let out a silence so deep it almost hummed. I walked over to the front door, turned the lock, and slid the new key into my pocket. For the first time in years, this house was truly mine again, not just in name, but in spirit. When the last echo of footsteps faded and the sheriff's car pulled away, the silence settled in like a heavy blanket. For years this house had been filled with noise, arguments, laughter, television blaring in the background, doors slamming shut, and now it was only me, the creak of old floorboards and the distant hum of the refrigerator. The quiet was both strange and comforting. I walked slowly from room to room, letting my hand brush over the walls. Each one carried a story. The pencil marks in the hallway where I had measured the children's growth year after year. The dent in the living room wall from when my eldest had kicked a ball indoors, ignoring Margaret's warnings. The kitchen table, scratched from decades of homework, family dinners, and long talks late into the night. Memories washed over me, bittersweet and unrelenting. I saw Margaret again, standing by the stove with flour on her hands, humming as she baked bread. I saw my daughter as a little girl, running through the house with ribbons in her hair. I heard the laughter of birthdays, the whispers of secrets shared on stormy nights. This house had carried so much love, and for a moment the emptiness pressed down hard, making my chest ache. I sat in Margaret's old chair by the window, the same one I'd leaned on during so many sleepless nights. Outside, the garden she had planted was overgrown but still blooming defiantly, as if reminding me that beauty could survive neglect. I thought of what had just happened, the shouting, the tears, the anger, and I wondered if Margaret would have approved. Would she have seen this as justice or as cruelty? The answer came softly in my heart. Margaret had always believed respect was the backbone of family. She used to say, "Love without respect is just dependence in disguise." And she was right. My children hadn't been pushed out by hate. They had been pushed out by their own choices, their refusal to show even the most basic respect to the man who raised them. I rose from the chair and opened a window. Fresh air flowed in, carrying the scent of lavender from the garden. For the first time in years, the air inside the house felt clean. It felt mine. The memories would stay, carved into the bones of the house, but the bitterness had been carried out the door with my children's boxes. The house was empty, yes, but it was no longer heavy. It was free. And so was I. The days that followed were quiet, almost too quiet. I woke up to the sound of birds instead of arguments, brewed my coffee without stepping over someone else's mess, and walked through rooms that finally stayed clean. At first, the silence was unsettling. I had grown used to the chaos, even if it drained me. But as the days passed, the peace began to settle into my bones like warmth on a cold morning. I took back the house one small task at a time. I repaired the broken latch on the garden gate, oiled the hinges on the porch door, and fixed the crack in the banister. With every repair, I felt a piece of myself return. For years I had stopped caring about these things because the house no longer felt like mine. But now, with each nail, each brush of paint, I was reclaiming it. Not just the building, but the pride of having built it in the first place. Neighbors noticed the difference too. Mrs. Henderson from across the street stopped by one afternoon. "House is looking good, Richard," she said kindly. I nodded, grateful, but I could see the unasked question in her eyes. "Where are the kids?" I simply told her they had. We'd moved on, and left it at that. The details were mine to carry, not gossip for the neighborhood. Still, not all ties were cut. A week after the eviction, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I found my youngest standing there alone, shoulders slumped, eyes tired. He wasn't carrying boxes or demands this time, just shame. "Can I come in?" he asked softly. "As a guest," I replied, holding the door. He nodded, accepting the boundary. We sat at the kitchen table where so many battles had been fought with words sharper than knives. This time there was only silence. Finally he spoke, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean all those things. We got carried away. I forgot what this house really means. I forgot what you mean." The apology wasn't perfect, but it was real. I let the words sit between us for a long moment before answering. "Sorry is the beginning," I said quietly. "Respect is the rest. If you want to be in this house, it has to be as a son who honors it, not as an owner who claims it." He nodded, tears in his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the boy he used to be, the boy who once ran through these halls laughing, not the man who mocked me for being old. That night, after he left, I stood in the doorway watching the moonlight spill across the garden. The house was still mine, but maybe, just maybe, there was hope that one day it could also be a place of respect again. The house stood in silence, but it was no longer the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of order, of peace, of dignity restored. I walked through each room slowly that evening, my hand brushing the walls as though reacquainting myself with an old friend. For years I had let my children's voices drown out my own, letting their entitlement dictate the rhythm of this house. But now the walls felt steady again, the air lighter. I thought back to Father's Day, to that moment when they handed me those socks, laughing as though I were some joke to be tolerated. In their eyes, I was nothing but a relic, waiting to fade away so they could claim what I had built. They didn't understand then, but they do now, that a father's worth cannot be measured by cheap gifts or hollow words. It is measured by the sacrifices he makes, the boundaries he defends, and the respect he demands when love is not enough. Margaret's voice echoed in my mind, her belief that respect was the backbone of family, and I realized that this wasn't about punishment. It was about teaching them what I had failed to teach before, that love without respect is just dependence in disguise. I had given them too much without asking for a no, in return, and this was the price of that mistake. But now, the lesson had been taught, not with anger, but with action. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of lavender from the garden. For the first time in a long while, I breathed freely, knowing that this home was once again mine, not just by deed, but by dignity. I didn't know what the future held for my children. Maybe they would come around, maybe they wouldn't. But I knew one thing for certain. I had reclaimed my worth, and no one would ever take it from me again. Before you go, if this story moved you, I ask you to subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And in the comments, tell me this. What do you believe respect in a family truly means? I'll be reading your stories because your voices matter.